Okay, perfect. Let's get started, everyone. Hello, welcome back. No, I wanna switch between tabs. Um, yeah, so welcome everyone. Thank you for tuning in with us. It's been almost, I don't know, been almost like half a year since we've done this in person. So we're resuming and we'll be trying to be a bit more consistent with these hybrid sessions in the coming months. I know it's very early in Indonesia, it's 6:30 a.m. So thank you very much for tuning in with us today. Um, we might change the timings given how bad it is for people in Indonesia. So stay tuned for that. Okay, so today, as you can see, it's gonna be a bit of an informal session. Um, this is our kickoff essentially for module 3, and I'm thinking of structuring it as a bit of a semi-discussion session. To the two people in the room with us today, you can just say whatever you want and chime in. For the people on Zoom, you can just raise your hand and then we will unmute you. But yeah, so let's just get started. So the third module, the title is quite self-explanatory. We are going to spend the next few months, not entirely, but a lot of it is we're going to be talking about Europe. And we were sort of conscious of the fact that, okay, it's a class called Deconstructing Indonesia. I'm sure there are a lot of very skeptical post-colonial Indonesians in the audience who are thinking, why are we talking about Europe when the world's Eurocentric enough already? And yes, we completely agree with you. And I promise you that this has exactly to do with this Eurocentrism. So let's just get straight into it. Why the hell are we talking about Europe? Um, and you know what? I'm gonna just full screen this because it's too small. So let me just kick off the discussion today by a bunch of post that I see. This is ikan gohu. It's a dish from Maluku. It's a kind of sashimi. At least that's how it's been described. But I want to call your attention to the image on the left. I just scrolling Instagram and I saw this, and you see the sort of version of ikan gohu as portrayed. And what I want to call your attention to is how this is described. Modern Indonesian food. So presumably, what you see here on the left is a modern take on ikan gohu, and what you have on the right is a non-modern take. So does anyone want to brainstorm and think about how is this modern? Well, what is Petty Elliott trying to do here? Why does she feel the need to say that this is modern as opposed to, I don't know, maybe this? Does anyone want to say a few words? Okay. Yes. By the way, I'm pulling up this like Google sheet where we're gonna brainstorm everything together. I'm gonna post it. I'm not gonna say your name. It's okay. It's just for us to brainstorm together. Okay, so you said something about location, decoration. Okay. Plotting. Okay, okay. Aesthetics. Okay, okay. Good, 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 good. Yeah. This clumsy. Okay, anyone else want to comment? Again, think about the word modern. What is the word modern? Okay, I because I'm sharing my screen, I don't have access to who might be raising their hands. So yes, okay. Thank you. Okay, same thing. It's like clean, organized, similar. Okay, there's a theme of a nice kind of aesthetic almost. This is clean, this is organized. Why? Why do you feel the need to signal that? And why use the word modern? What is the word modern doing here? Does anyone wanna chime in? Okay. Oh, perfect, Bibiarma. Let's see. French culinary. Okay, that's a good point. I'm gonna hold on to that thought. French culinary. Yes. Do you wanna chime in, Dibyarma? Do you have any thoughts on sort of modern ikan gohu? Yes. Okay, that's okay. It's 6:30 a.m. Um, But yeah, I think some themes are coming up here about sort of order, about tidiness, and about how this sort of maybe there's an element of class too, right? You're trying to signal that modern food is more luxurious, it's more upscale, right? It's more desirable almost. And the French culinary thing is interesting, right? Because that's like, what's the implication there? If you eat it straight from this plate from Maluku, it's not modern. But if it's, you know, if you can find it in a, I don't know, Michelin restaurant, it's somehow more desirable. Okay, let's move on from this to sort of that's the hinge. That's sort of what we're going to be talking about today. And okay, yeah, perfect. Yeah, the Western, yeah, I do want us to like hold on to that as well. No, perfect, perfect. Thank you. Presentation, yeah, same themes, kitchen decoration. Okay, so why are we even talking about this? Why should we even care? Why are we so focused on this word modern? And again, we use a little bit of an innocent example, food, but we use this every day to describe all sorts of things, right? There's a Reddit post on, is democracy inevitable in a modern advanced society? That's almost like saying, okay, if you're modern, then you have to be democratic, whatever democratic means. And again, note that they pair modern with advanced, right? There's always this sense of being forward, being ahead. Here there's a blog, this is self-explanatory. I don't have to describe what he thinks the definition of a real man is, but notice that he calls the blog the modern man, right? Like again, this is like, okay, this is what a real man is, and a real man is a modern man. Like it's a good thing. This is what you want to be, right? This is modern, this is good. And even it bleeds into bureaucratic language, right? You have to modernize infrastructure in the AI era. And what's the word in Indonesian? It's like, "Huwag mo ketinggalan zaman." You don't want to be behind. So there's this theme of like being forward and not sort of falling behind. Um, so this word permeates our everyday existence, and I hope as we're trying to, as we've shown, as we're trying to slowly show that this permeates our everyday existence. And I promise you, we'll get to why this is why we're even talking about this in a class called Deconstructing Indonesia. So let's brainstorm a bit more. And I have a bunch of examples. I'm going to walk you through them. And again, we can think with each other like, again, what does modern mean? It's a loaded term. And what's in this term? Why does it matter? And here I have two examples of markets in Indonesia. In an Indonesian language, it's not even subtle. You have a pasar tradisional, you have a traditional market, and you have a modern market on the right. What makes this modern? What makes a market modern and what makes a market traditional? Does anyone want to weigh in, especially Indonesians?
I think there's additional value on like the modern market. So
Okay,
for
value.
example, now we have now the modern market have more employees to structure the fruit,
Creates
and
feelings.
there's another
More.
person who will do the back end of the
Okay, okay, okay.
market. So it is like more uh, structured, and somehow it connects to this uh, creating more value. We don't know if
More value.
popular value or
Right.
bayang-bayang value.
Right, right, right. So that's something that's been carried over from our discussion of the Kangohu, right? To be modern is to be structured almost. Okay. Why might that be a good thing? Again, everyone is using this term modern in a very specific way, right? They're juxtaposing it to something else. Why is structure desirable? Why is it a good thing? What makes you backwards if you don't have structure? Does anyone wanna? Oh, there's a lot of chats. Let me just open it up. Uh more West again. The Western stuff is coming in again. Yes, I'll just put it in. Western. I'll put in all caps. Yes. Okay. Hans Sutikno. It's more institutionalized also with more commercial interest. What you mentioned here, right? Has more value.
Yeah.
Commercialization. Good, 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 good. And then Okay, I put that in already. More plastic, individual packaging, Alcia said. So it's linked here to like almost like consumerism, right? Consumerism, branding. Okay. Okay, Lutfia here has a good point. Sorry. It's more comfortable. To be modern is to be in a more comfortable situation. Okay, AAC, less puddles. Yes, yes. Perfect, perfect, perfect. Okay, good, 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 good. Um, again, looks clean. It's more important than the nutritional ingredients. And that's interesting to think about because in modern packaging for food, you try to explicitly list the nutritions. But does that mean it's actually more nutritious? Um, okay, technology. That's a big point. Okay, good. I think we have a nice.
I think there's
Yes.
also this sense of uh, I think probably the same like 5 minutes. But I think if we compare like the Chinese restaurant, they're shouting, so it's have like this different atmosphere
Okay,
where
okay,
like the
okay.
quote unquote modern Chinese
Yeah,
restaurant,
yeah.
it's like yeah,
More,
you should keep quiet,
right,
you should enjoy food for yourself, for your family.
Yeah, what's the word?
There.
Sterile, civilized,
Yeah.
some would say. And that's a loaded term too, right? Civilized. Let's put that in.
I think also
Sterile, mannered,
have, yeah,
civilized.
sterile.
Okay, perfect, perfect, perfect. Protection from malak. Yeah, let me read the few more comments. But from Areta, modern is kind of a legitimation of something that is considered and perceived as more valued. Yes, that's the connotation of modern. Modern has a connotation. If you're modern, you're somehow better. Okay, security. Okay, security. And Alcia commented, even though usually in traditional markets, the food is more fresh farm to table. Yes. Okay. Modernity there's another theme that's emerging here. I'm getting modernity as a veneer of like there's a connotation that if you're modern that you're better, but that's not always true. It's almost like a packaging, maybe you might say, as a veneer of betterness. Okay. Well, I'm gonna move on because this is I don't want us to like fall behind. Okay. There's another word I want you all to sort of focus on, revitalisasi in Indonesian. And in English, that means basically to revitalize. And usually when you have projects that try to transform traditional markets to modern markets, that's the word that's used. Revitalisasi daerah. We want to revitalize the region. This is not subtle language. It's almost like you're saying this is dead and this is more living, right? And that tracks with everything we've been talking about with how there's a connotation of being better when you're modern. Why are you better? Because you're more organized, you're cleaner, you're more commercial, you're more industrialized, whatever. Okay, let's move on. Okay, similar exercise. Let's brainstorm again together, slowly building up this sense of modernity. Um, over here on the left is Selamatan. It's a communal meal, usually that you have in rural Indonesia. And it's often seen as a kind of social welfare system because notables and more affluent people in the village will hold this giant feast. Everyone's going to attend, and that's sort of considered like a transfer of wealth or resources. I don't think it's very fair here. It's not really worth it. You see all the rice. Where's the protein? But I digress. So that's welfare in a way, right? But we're not. I'm assuming a lot of us, especially if you're from Jakarta, this is not the kind of welfare you're familiar with. This is the kind you're familiar with. And the words come up again, right? This is a traditional way of life, a traditional kind of welfare, and this is a modern kind. So let's think about that again, especially it's like whenever we say something is modern, we're also comparing it to something that's behind, that's traditional. It never exists in isolation, right? There's always something behind. Does anyone want to have a few words on this? Maybe think about, I don't know, discourses of development, maybe?
Yeah, I think for welfare, especially,
As a living.
like the traditional welfare that you shown in the picture are more like collective. But I
Okay.
think in the modern welfare,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
already have like this division of labor. You are doing this, you are doing that. So again, it's a bit more institutionalized, and you don't really
Yeah.
have like the collectivism of the means of production.
Mhm. Traditional is communal. Okay. Yeah. So it's almost like to be modern is to be more individualist,
Yeah,
almost. So that's a strange value insertion, right? If you think about it, to be modern is to be individualist. Yeah. Does anyone want to comment on that? How about development? What does this tell you about development? Sorry, let me type this off. Sorry. I, please. Thank you.
yes, modern warfare are more streamlined, more bureaucracy, but to be fair, more outreach. And Areta says,
Okay,
I
okay,
prefer
okay.
saying these two are not equivalent in categories. So one is
Yes.
communal and one is
Yes.
institutional.
Yes. Okay, let's get on those both points. For Alcia, yes, this is sort of going back to the earlier themes of structure of rational organization, right? And to Areta, yes, you're absolutely right. One is communal and one is institutional. They're not comparable, but we compare them anyway. When people talk about them, they compare them anyway. This communal thing is labeled traditional in the discourse, and this institutional one is labeled modern. There's something going on here, right? There's something easier to okay, simplification. Okay, good. I want us, okay, because I want to keep us moving again. I want us to return to these themes about how, again, there are these themes of no one mentioned the state yet. But that's sort of like the implication with calling this institutional, right? That there's a state actor behind this. It's sort of ordered, it's managed, it's rational. Um, but also implications of progress, like we say. Haven't you seen a poster or a policy brief that says kita harus modernisasi? We have to modernize. And what's the implication? We need more systems like this. I'm not saying these systems are bad, but there's something's going on here, right? So that's where I want to lead us to next, which is this sort of discourse of modernity and development, because it's everywhere in the world, right? It's a classic developing country map. Does anything come to your mind when you look at this? What do the colors overlap with, maybe?
Colonization.
Exactly. Exactly. So that's okay. It took us a very long time to get here, but this is essentially why we're talking about modernity. We've seen how it's so loaded. We've seen how we insert so much value judgments in it, and it turns out that it might be linked to colonization, right? About how a modern country might just be modernization might just be a discourse used by colonizing countries. And maybe there's something on the chat here. Let me see. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'm gonna. Sorry. um. And this is not new. When we think about the high noon of colonization in the 19th century, what's the discourse? What's the justification? It's to civilize them. It's a civilizing mission, right? If there's sort of this poster of a white man carrying sort of colored peoples on his back. I'm breaking your back. They don't say, I want your resources. They don't say, I'm conquering you. They say, well, I'm uplifting. I'm bringing you forward to the modern age. You're not civilized enough. You're not developed enough. There's an intimate link here. And sometimes it's intertwined with just blatant racism. We have this ad here for Pear Soap. Here it says, Pear Soap is a potent factor in brightening the dark corners of the earth. So again, it's not being subtle at all. And it persists till today. For example, like freedom. Maybe to be not modern is to be seen as not being free enough. Maybe you don't have democracy. So we have to bring democracy to you. And again, it's very, very loaded, right? And I pulled up this quote from Alyssa Rubin. She's a journalist at the New York Times. And the bolded part, especially, is very telling. She surveys the ground and she says, okay, the Sunnis and the Shiites, they commit horrific crimes. I wasn't surprised. But the Kurds, they have modern looking cities, they have Western ways, but they were capable of being barbarous. There's a value judgment going on here. The Sunnis and the Shiites, they don't have modern cities, they don't have Western values. I wasn't surprised that they were barbarous. But these people who remind me of myself, how could they be barbarous? So that's, again, coming back to sort of the poster that we made to inaugurate Module 3. This is why we're turning to modernity, because discourses of modernity are intimately linked with discourses of colonialization. But it's not that simple. Because if these modern ideals like freedom are just something that is used, something that's imposed by a colonial power, let's just throw them all away. Let's just throw them all away. And we have this discourse in Indonesia that operates exactly along these lines, right? And there's often this boogeyman, usually it's called liberalism, and it becomes this sort of repository for all sorts of things that you don't like. And then you say, this is important. This is not aligned with authentic Indonesian culture. So let's just toss it away, right? I don't know. What do you think? What do people think? Should we? Oh. Mm. Mhm. Okay, Zaki Arif here. Oh, Jer commented before. Yes, modernity is sometimes treated as equivalent to development. We talked about that. And then Zaki, does it feel like institutionalization is more rational while traditionalism is more romanticized? Because so-called colonizer tends to be able to argue that they provide a more vivid idea of welfare instead of traditional value that's so vague. Okay. We'll get to this point, especially next week, where we're talking about these labels, modern, traditional. What do they mean? We'll actually get to that soon too, but that's a great point. But I don't know. Does anyone wanna comment on this? On sort of, this sort of there's something that's authentically Indonesian and all these modern things that we're talking about, sometimes they're just not in line with Indonesian culture. Let's throw them out. What do you think? What do you think about that discourse? Does anyone want to comment on that?
I think it's so nuanced, so I'm not sure what does all this means. Is it do you mean like the society politics nowadays or
Yeah. We're getting back to that same theme again and again. We've been using these words, modernity, tradition, and Zaki pointed at this. What do they mean? It's actually not very clear. We use them as standards of comparison all the time. We instinctively use them as value judgments, but it's actually not very clear what they really mean. Let me put that down in the Google Sheet. Sorry. Oh, sorry. It's actually not clear. These things. Modernity means. Okay. Why does this matter? Because you might say, we're just splitting semantics. These are just words. Why bother? The thing is, these things become imbued into a lot of social practices and they have real consequences. As this quote from Ariel Herianto, and it's again, it's self-explanatory. In the pursuit of an authentically Indonesian nation state, for decades, Indonesians have denied the civil rights of fellow citizens for being less authentically Indonesian. Right?
Yeah, one thing that comes to my mind when seeing the question is more into like For example, in the indigenous community, they preserve the environment, etc. Right?
Yes.
And then when the modernization came, and their resources are get extracted, now they are getting impacted by all of this quote unquote modernization, and these colonizers left from their place to settle in another place. So if this question is being used in this certain area,
Yeah.
it might be different. I mean, the answer, if we are doing this question into like a different aspects, not in the natural extraction, but like in political space, etc. So,
Right. And that again, that goes back to what we've been talking about, right? This thing is just so it's like so like what do you even mean? You're bundling so many things in one and it gets confusing what means what.
generalizing, modernizing.
Exactly. But we do it all the time, right? We just say this is modern, this is not, this is backwards, this is not. Okay, good. I want you to hold on to that as well. Okay, a few comments from Alcia. Okay, this is a very important point. That sounds like essentialist, right? The one thing is more pure than the other. Right. Like you're trying to recover an authentic Indonesian sensibility. That's essentialist. And does that not sound kind of like this? Is that not so different? So it's almost like, and we'll get to this point. There's an you sort of sometimes have this sense that okay, we want to recover something that's authentically Indonesian. We want to save it from colonial influence. But are you just replicating a colonial argument when you're doing that? That's why all of this is so tricky, right? But we'll get back to that point later. So yes, let's move on. Let's return to these discourses on development, right? Because we've shown that it's linked to colonial. Oh, wait, someone commented. I'm sorry, I completely forgot. Okay, Lutfia. So both of these terms is yes, exactly. They're absolutely loaded. And we'll talk about that next week a lot more. And this loadedness comes here too, right? Because we've been talking about how, oh, development, it has colonial implications. But what if someone comes up to you and says, well, but if development means better trains, why is that a bad thing? If development means poverty reduction, why is that a bad thing? If development means I don't have to swim across 3 rivers to get to school, what does that mean? And how much time do we have? Okay, I'll just zoom past this then. What I'm trying to say, and this has been coming up a lot from you guys, modernity is something that's contested, right? It could mean something that it could mean extraction. It can mean prosperity. It can mean freedom as imperialism. It can mean genuine emancipation, right? And what is the best example of this? Oh, wait. Indonesia itself. And if we look, these are excerpts from some of the nationalist figures, Sukarno and Syahrir. They very explicitly portray Indonesia as a project of modernity, as a contestation of modernity. Here is Sukarno in his speech, Indonesia Menggugat, very clearly. We used to have a feudal past, but we don't want any of that. We don't want Majapahit. We don't want Sriwijaya. What we want is a modern, and this is where it gets loaded again. We want a modern state. We want a modern nation state. But again, he's very conscious about this. And a lot of the mainline nationalist figures repeat this argument in some form or another, right? And we see this all the time today. You see a freedom movement or some emancipatory or some progressive movement. What do they say? Isn't that so 20th century? Isn't that so barbaric? We don't want to go back to the Middle Ages. We live in the modern age, right? It's a discourse that's consistently mobilized for things like this. Syahrir is even more interesting because he situates the Indonesian revolution within a genealogy that starts where? With France. with France. You have the French Revolution, and the French Revolution cleared the way for capitalism and imperialism. The Indonesian Revolution is just the latest that will end that cycle. The French brought capitalism and imperialism into being in the Indonesian Revolution, and all the other third world revolutions are going to bring it to an end. Again, it's this is, and in this is where Europe comes back in that we've been talking a lot about colonialism and about sort of like European subjugation, but the Indonesian Revolution, a profoundly anti-colonial movement, is thinking of itself through very European terminologies. It's almost like it's borrowing from Europe to give Europe the middle finger. And that's the contestation that I want us to focus on, because that sort of becomes crucial for everything that we'll be talking about. And then again, right? We've been using these terms: modernity, development, Europe, Indonesia. What are they? Again, you guys nailed this on the head. They're so vague and abstract. They have power, but they're so vague and abstract. What even do these categories mean? And here I have a post from Coretanist. And here they make a very interesting argument, which is that if you look at modern Malays and you ask them, who are your ancestors? They'll look at, I forgot his name, but he's a king of Sriwijaya, which is this kingdom in Sumatra. So it's like, he's authentically Malay. He's ethnically Malay. He's our ancestor. And because of that, we are free from colonialism, right? Because we don't want, we're returning to our roots. Remember the sort of the discourse of liberalism is foreign. We want to return to our roots, right? Well, it's not so simple, because 17th century Malays who weren't colonized by the British, weren't colonized by the Dutch, they didn't think this guy was their ancestor. Who did they think? Alexander the Great, a supposed European. And so it's, again, we're coming back to that same argument. And this is sort of where what we're trying to do here is related to decolonization. Decolonization is not that straightforward. It is not as straightforward as saying, this is Indonesian, this is European or whatever, and we want to preserve whatever is authentically Indonesian. Because sometimes in insisting on that, maybe you are already reproducing a kind of colonial logic. And we'll see that in more detail in the coming classes. And this is where I'm going to announce our collaboration with the Coretanist. They are this collective that is focused on decolonization. They have a lot of good work. I encourage you to follow them on Instagram. They have a Substack. They post a lot of interesting articles. Auf, their head honcho, is a very big manuscript guy. We'll be working a lot with them in the coming sessions. So again, let me sort of try to summarize everything that we've been talking about. And again, we've come up with like a pretty big list, I think, of what modernity could mean. And that big list is sort of reflective of the vagueness of this term. But I think that what seems to be clear is that modernity is a way of is a relationship with the past, is a relationship with history, almost with time. It's a way of saying, okay, we are now modern, and then there is somewhere in the past, traditional. And then you grade yourself, right? That's why it becomes a moral judgment, right? When you say someone is backwards, what you are really saying is that you're sort of less or you're worse off because you haven't caught up. So it's a relationship with time. And it's, oh, there's someone on the chat. Okay, let me read this. Yes. So from Zaki, it's like this. Most of indigenous perceptions of nature itself are seeing them as sacred, but they don't know the complexity that they've been deemed sacred. They don't know the value of biodiversity. While a mining company would try to convince local people with so-called modernity like internet, electricity, healthcare, fancy building, I don't name it. The problem is indigenous people fail to institutionalize or call it communalize their value. They fail to preserve their knowledge in the more accepted epistemology of human neurology. Does it mean modernity is how, yes, this is actually, we'll be talking about this in 2 weeks, and that's part of the tragedy of what happens with indigenous communities, where sometimes their epistemology is genuinely incomprehensible to people who are quote unquote modern or more modern. That's not anyone's fault. And it certainly isn't, and it's that's just sort of the epistemic divide you see. But what makes it tragic is that because indigenous communities live in a world where notions of modernity are hegemonic, to survive, you have to translate your ideas into modernity. But the moment you do that, you kind of lose a part of your own self, of what made you you until this point. That's a very sort of it's a very coarse way of putting it, but that's sort of, you hit it right on the you hit it right on the head. Anyway, okay, let's move on because I think I'm sort of we're behind. So again, if modernity is a way of grading with the past, what are the criteria that you usually use? And we talk about some of this in the sort of the Google Sheets, right? It's linked to prosperity and education sometimes. If you're modern, you're more educated, you're more rational, you're richer, you're more industrialized, you're more developed. It's also linked to notions of the individual. If you're modern, you respect the individual more, you have voting, you have representative democracy, maybe. It's also quite colonial. Notions of modernity are used to justify colonial endeavors, but they're also emancipatory and sometimes anti-colonial, as we've seen with sort of the Indonesian Revolution. They're also very European, and we'll see why soon after. But also, again, they're very Indonesian, and they can be Chinese, they can be, or whatever. The point that I really want to highlight is that this thing is very contested. Modernity is a notion that's very much contested. And why does the contest feel so urgent? Because modernity becomes a grading system. It becomes an aspiration. You're forced to contest it. Otherwise, you're just labeled backwards. That's why this is so central. And we do this in very unconscious ways. Modern, backwards, progressive, and whatever. And I think a quote that really helped, oh, that comes later. Sorry, I'll get to that later. So again, let's return to the animating question. Why are we back in Europe? Why do we have to talk about Europe? On one level, to return to modernity, it's because so much of these notions of modernity emerged during the Enlightenment in the 17th and 18th century in Europe. That's part of the reason why we're doing that. Now, with relation to Indonesia itself, I want us to return to a point we made very early on in the first module, where we kind of saw Indonesia as this rebellious child of the Dutch, right? It's an anti-colonial movement. It's a rejection of European modernity, of the Dutch in some sense, but it wouldn't have existed without them. It thinks of itself through European logics in many cases. And the way I like to sort of describe it to people is like, the Dutch is Indonesia's abusive dad. And when you have an abusive dad, at some point, maybe you want to look him in the eye. And because, again, does he haunt you still? Does the colonial specter, does the abusive father still haunt Indonesia even today? Because there's still so many plantations. The penal code is practically unchanged. Does the father haunt us still? You can't get rid of it. But maybe we can look at the haunting, right? And this haunting sometimes happens in very subtle, very unconscious ways. I have this quote from Dipesh Chakrabarty, and I'm going to read all up because it's quite beautiful. Can thought transcend places of their origins? He's talking here about European thought, and what he's referring here specifically to is how European thought becomes presented as just thought. People forget that difference. And the next lines make that very clear. My starting point in all this questioning was the silent and everyday presence of European thought. Silent and everyday, it's there, but they don't have to speak. We don't know they're there. The Enlightenment was part of my sentiments. Only I did not know it as such. Marx was a household Bengali name. His German upbringing was never commented upon. This recognition of a deep and often unknown depth to European thought was my point of departure. Without that, there could be no provincializing Europe. And someone commented, I'm intrigued, understand. Oh, I assure you, I have no baggage at all. You'll just have to trust me, okay? But to return to this, oh, here's another comment. Ah,
You
I-
can never escape.
yeah, yes. Do we want to take a 5-minute break to think about our, no, okay,
No.
let's,
Nothing stops.
nothing stops, okay, father, poof, let's go. I hope my dad doesn't watch this. I'm sorry, Dad. It was a joke. It was a joke. So that's why we're talking about Europe, because Chakrabarti too, even though his project was of provincializing Europe, you can't do that until you actually try to reckon with what Europe actually is, and how does Europe stay with you. And that's why we're talking about Europe. That's why we're back in Europe. And that brings us to the actual content of Module 3. This is what we're going to be focusing on. We're going to be focusing on this contest of modernity. And of course, we're going to be focused first on the Enlightenment. We're going to be talking about 16th to 18th century Europe, where a lot of these notions that get packaged as what it means to be modern emerge, and then they spread across the world through capitalism, through colonialism, through sheer expansion. And we see how people have to respond to that. And we move on in the second segment on Islam in the 19th century with reformist and modernist movements. Alcia and Alf are going to be covering these sections. And it's the same story. The Islamic world confronts the battering ram, the juggernaut of European imperialism, of European notions of modernity, and they have to wrestle with that. And one of the themes here is Europe comes in and says, well, to be modern is to be secular. Or that's at least one argument of modernity. And then if you're in the Islamic world, you say, can I still be Muslim and modern? And then the interesting thing is that this contestation doesn't just take place outside of Europe. It takes place within Europe as well. And that brings us to Marxism. And that's why we'll be talking about Marxism as a contest of the Enlightenment within Europe itself. The Enlightenment comes in and says, people need to be free. You need political rights. The socialists come in and say, have you thought about economics? Have you thought about starvation? That's the Marxist challenge. And part of the reason we chose Islam and Marxism is because Islam and Marxism also play a very big role eventually in the period we're covering in Indonesia. So it's sort of like this will double as like a prereq, not prereq, I don't like using that word, like a primer on Islamic and Marxist thought before we sort of move into Module 4. And these are sort of some keywords that we'll be unpacking along the way. Because again, we're trying to see how it's contested. We're trying to see how these things like enlightenment, secularism, and development, they, like Chakrabarti say, they sort of like operate silently, right? And we want to unpack that. And we're going to enlist some assistance for that. And that's through post-colonial theory. We'll be reading a lot of these texts in parallel with post-colonial thought. And really, who are the post-colonial theorists? Well, they are sort of basically a bunch of academics from the global South who most of them end up in Western academic institutions. But what unites them is one question. Okay, if we already have independence, why hasn't so much changed? How does coloniality persist even though we gain independence? And so they try to think about coloniality in very interesting and subtle ways, which is perfect for what we're trying to do. And all of this is going to build up to Module 4. And this is my sales pitch for the class. You don't care about Marxism, you don't care about 19th century Islam, you don't care about Enlightenment, fine. But if you care about Module 4, you care about when we finally return to Indonesia, this is why. This is our sales pitch. What Module 3 is doing is that it sets up modernity as this thing that is contested. It sets up this theme. And what it does is that it allows us to reconceptualize Indonesian history as a contest of modernization, of modernity. Typical Indonesian historical narratives start with the 1900s. National awakening, kebangkitan nasional. You begin in the aftermath of the ethical policy from the Dutch, where they start educating Indonesians in Dutch schools. Begins with the formation of Budi Utomo, the first modern organization. And it's sort of all just leads up to the nation state. It all leads up to sort of Indonesia emerging into history, right? It's very much a nationalist history. And it's very Batavia, Jakarta-centric. But what if Indonesian history isn't just a history of national awakening? What if it was a history of a contest of modernity, wherein the nationalist movement was just one part of that, existing in parallel with what? Sarekat Islam, PKI, or just any stirrings at like education. That allows us to start from a very, very different point. And this is Auf's idea, so I'm going to give him credit for this. This allows us to start in the 1800s, and not in Jakarta, not in Batavia, but around Sumatra, in Riau. Because what happens in the 1800s? The Johor Sultanate, which sort of straddles both sides of the Straits of Malacca, gets severed in half by British and Dutch colonialism. And that prompts an existential reckoning. What does it mean to be Malay? And then they start asking interesting questions. Does it have to do with language? Does it have to do with culture? And so that allows us to retell this story from a very different starting point. And notice that in this retelling, the history of Indonesia is also intertwined with the history of Malaysia, right? So that allows us to sort of negotiate a lot of these boundaries in a more interesting way. And okay, so that's the module 4 pitch. Now I'm going to sort of just give a brief overview of what I want to do with the part on the Enlightenment, which I'll be sort of presenting to you all over the coming weeks. So I hope we've made it sufficiently clear why this is important. But let me bring in Chakrabarti again and try to restate what we're really trying to do, not just in the Enlightenment sections, but in all module 3. And again, he talks about how European thought functions as a silent thing, right? That you don't even know it's there. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to make the silence speak. That's what we're trying to do. It's unconscious. We're trying to sort of make it less unconscious. Because, and again, this is linked to a version of decolonization. Because what if the fact that some people, some traditions, some ways of being in the world don't have to speak, don't have to speak to be heard? And that's a bit abstract. So let me give you an example. I was interested in, at some point I was interested in learning about Hatta and Sumitra, sort of the first Indonesian economists. And I was like, when I tell people, I always say, I'm interested in Indonesian economics. And I caught myself in the middle of it, because if I was studying Adam Smith, I wouldn't say I'm interested in English economics. I would just say I'm interested in economics. There's a silence there. Why does that silence exist? And sometimes people intentionally make the silence a non-silence. Like you say Indonesian economics, like as a point, like this is different. I want to distinguish it. That's doing a lot of heavy duty. And it's not only true in a colonial context. Think of feminist economics. Think of Black economics. Something is going on here. What happens when you scrub out this thing and leave a blank economics? Why does this thing not have to be said? And if some traditions don't have to speak to be heard, what about everyone else who's yelling and yelling and yelling, like the indigenous communities you were talking about? They're yelling and no one hears them because no one understands what's going on. That's what we're really interested in module 3. That's the sort of guiding principle across this entire segment. So the Enlightenment is a very vast thing. And so I'm just going to narrow it down. I'm also not sort of a specialist in the Enlightenment at all. So I'm just going to narrow it down to a specific thing. So across the next 5 to 6 weeks, what we're going to do is we're going to try to slowly construct a theory of the modern administrative nation state. And if you sort of like decompose this line, there are multiple themes, right? When you talk about administrative, there again, we talked about this, right, with the modernity brainstorming, notions of order, of management, of rational organization, of reason. And then the nation state is self-explanatory, right? Questions about what does it mean to be a people? What does it mean to be a nation? And what does this have to do with this institution called the state? And then finally, modern, everything we've been talking about, right? This sort of value judgment that you put on it, as if, it's desirable to have an administrative nation state compared to alternative systems, maybe? I don't know. So that's what we're going to be building up towards. And that's where the post-colonial scholars become interesting. Because we build up this theory and then we bring in post-colonial theory to show, are these concepts operating as a kind of silence? Have they become a default template that we just think about reflexively, unconsciously? And what might be underneath the surface once we start unpacking that? And I'm going to do it, again, I'm going to structure it by these keywords. So we're going to start with the administrative part. So we're going to be talking about Enlightenment notions of reason. And here it's still a bit tentative. I'm still working on the structure, and a lot will depend on like if I have time to go through all of this. So in the first, so the way I'm thinking of doing this is we're generally going to start with a text or like a series of texts from the Enlightenment, and I'm going to pair them with a post-colonial thinker. So for the first class on Enlightenment reason, we're going about Descartes, and then we'll pair him with Edward Said, who's Orientalism. We're going to do the same going on. Wollstonecraft and Spivak, when we talk about emancipation. We're going to be talking about the nation state through Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan, and then we're going to pair him with Partha Chatterjee, who is Spivak and Chatterjee are Columbia, by the way. And finally, when we talk about modernity, this is where we start trying to think about the Enlightenment as a historical narrative, where we really start to unpack the silence. And here, I'm going to do things a bit differently. I'm just going to be relying on a few scholars of French studies and Enlightenment history, Edelstein and Lilty. And finally, if I have time, all of this is very theoretical and abstract. I think it would be helpful if we can sort of concretize all of this in an actual historical example. So if I can read this stuff on time, eventually I'm going to be talking about the French and the Haitian revolutions, because you're going to really see how this contest of modernity is happening within the French Revolution, but also between the French and the Haitians. And there are two great books here, R.R. Palmer on the Reign of Terror in the French Revolution. C.L.R. James, I think he's Trinidadian. He's a Trinidadian historian who talks about the Haitian Revolution, and Toussaint Louverture, who is one of the major leaders. So that's the tentative structure. Okay, that should be most of the big things, but before I close, I do want to make two announcements. So we talked a lot about how these things operate as a kind of silence, and then there are traditions and ways of thinking or communities that are yelling and yelling and yelling and they're not heard. We want to provide an avenue for that, because a lot of what we're doing with post-colonial theory and sort of the deconstructing here is we're unpacking the silence. But I don't think we're yelling. I mean, for God's sake, I'm reading Descartes, I'm reading Edward Said. I don't think I have to yell. People know who these people are. But maybe some of you in our community are yelling, or you felt like you've been yelling all your life, or you know someone, some community who's just been yelling and yelling and yelling. And if you do, and you want to present on this stuff, please reach out to us. Please reach out to us. You can DM us on Instagram. You can just DM any of us, any of the admins on the WhatsApp group. We will find a time to host a session of whatever you want to present. A good example is this paper on Ngopi as methodology that Nathan shared with the group, and it's fantastic. It's sort of, Ngopi is this sort of like, it's this informal thing. And then most of you are Indonesians, I don't even have to explain. You just like chill and chat, right? And that's not counted as formal ethnography because it's all unstructured, right? But you're also information gathering. So that's the kind of, again, that's the kind of silence, right, that we're talking about, and the kind of yelling that we want to amplify. So if any of you have that, please, I really mean this. Please reach out to us. We will try our best. We will definitely find a way to like slot you in. That's first announcement. The second announcement is, I don't know if any of you have ever felt bored and then decided to wander into a library with a phone and you just start scanning all the books on your phone. Because if you do, we specifically Nathan needs your help. So Nathan has been building this phenomenal digital archive, Langka at Logos ID, and so far we've again that's how we've been building it, right? We just go into a library and then you just start scanning everything. And so if this is tugging at your conscience and you want to respond to this moral call, and if you're in any of these 6 cities, please again reach out to us. Nathan will point you to a library, he'll point you to a manuscript, and you'll send it. Unfortunately, we can't pay you. We don't have a lot of money, but we can show you some appreciation, and you will have the gratitude of posterity. So okay, I think that's my final announcement, and I think that should be it for today. So thank you. Sorry if the session was rambling, but Nathan wants to say something.
No, I want to ask.
Oh, okay.
So I think like the when you are trying to deconstruct the word modern or modernity,
Yes.
I think it's still left hanging
Yeah.
because modern and modernity is, I assume, something different,
Yeah.
and we haven't even talked about like what is pre-modern and post-modern.
Yeah.
If we
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
talking about
Yeah.
modernity.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
does pre-modern means traditional? I think it's a different thing, right? So how
Right.
do you try
Right.
to?
Right. Right. So that will basically be the entire subject of module 3.
Okay.
And the reason why is because again, we've just been talking about this for several minutes. And again, anyone feel free to chime in on chat or raise your hand if you want to ask any questions. It's just so hard to I've struggled to define this. That's why it took me like weeks to try to even think about the brainstorming exercise, because it's like I didn't really know how we would go. Because I was of the sense that like people would just have very different ideas of what it meant, and it turns out that there were some commonalities, but it would just go in all sorts of directions. It's not very clear, and that's why we're dedicating 3 to 5 months to just trying to unpack all of this. So the honest answer is you're absolutely right, and I can't answer it yet. And at the end of 5 months, I don't think we'll have a clean answer either. I think that's the point. It's almost like this. It's like, what is it? It's like Christianity, right? It's like Christianity, right?
Okay.
Like, I hope I'm not offending anyone with it, but it's like Christianity in the sense that like, okay, there's some things that are like, okay, there's the crucifix, there's the New Testament, there's the role of Jesus. There's some basic elements that people are like, okay, that is Christianity. But beyond that, it's so, what is it? It's so contested. And people from different parts of the world sort of like have their own spin on it. And over time, it just keeps changing. The meaning of it changes. And I don't know if that's the best comparison, but modernity has very similar connotations too. Chat? Oh, did I? Oh, okay. Oh, perfect.
Yeah, no, you can.
Yes, I am not entirely familiar with the decolonial tradition. So maybe if anyone else is, you can sort of chime in. What I've noticed is that the post-colonial scholars that I'm mostly talking about here, they're a very specific breed, because that a lot of them are South Asian, and a couple of them come from the Middle East. And what's interesting about them is they're all within Western institutions of higher education. I think that's the thing, that one of the things that unites them. Whereas the decol tradition, a lot of it comes from Latin America, if I'm not. Mignolo, Piano.
Oh, the theory, yeah.
The
but
theories, right?
practices.
Oh yeah, the practices are, yes. But in terms of the theory, no, I do not know about Niatero. Sorry, I'm getting distracted. Let me answer that question first. Sorry. Um, what I sense the difference is that post-colonial theory is much more ambiguous about sort of the colonial world's relations, the post-colonial world's relationship with Europe. I haven't read enough of Mignolo or Quijano to sort of get a sense of that, but just skimming, that's my sense. Because like Chakrabarti is such a great example. What was the word that he used? The debt to Europe. He wants to provincialize Europe, but he doesn't necessarily say that, let's kick it all out. And I don't know if this is an oversimplistic sort of reading of Mignolo and Quijano and the decolonial theorists, but the decolonial theorists are much, much more, or maybe let me rephrase all of that. Postcolonial theory to me functions more as a diagnosis. Whereas decolonial, which is why Nathan mentioned the praxis too, is already prescriptive. We have to decolonize. You don't hear people say we have to post-colonialize. It's a diagnosis. It's a way of sort of like looking at post-colonial societies and trying to see how colonial relations sort of exist beyond mere territorial conquest, which is what decolonial theory and decolonial practice also does. But then decolonial theory moves beyond the sort of diagnosis and goes then, okay, let's root this all out. What would that mean? And so the example here is that, for example, again, this might be a misrepresentation. I have to put that disclaimer out again. But for example, when we were talking about the silence and the yelling, when we're trying to unpack the silence, that's a very post-colonial move. But to move to sort of like, okay, let's amplify the yelling, that's much more decolonial, I think. I don't know if anyone else has a different understanding of that.
I think it's very nuanced, right?
Yeah.
So another point of view is, for example, if we are talking about environment again, if we are doing like the post-colonial way, there's still some sort of, again, development or some technology that can be put into like a
Do you mean post-colonial way as in post-colonial theory or post-colonial states are doing that?
Post-colonial state or even theory, because
Okay.
you cannot escape from what we already have
Mm, mm.
been doing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Meanwhile, I think the
Okay,
decolonial term is more like we should save this environment.
Right. So what I'm getting out of that is that post-colonial theory, there's almost like this implicit, like, there's only so much we can do. Like it's
And I think we probably cannot escape like
cannot
this
escape. Gotcha.
history that colonization already done.
Okay. Yeah. I see what you mean. Okay. Okay, yeah, I think that's very clarifying. Did that answer your question, Ethan? Oh yeah, Alcia has a. Who should I go for? We can get to that if everyone is still tuning. It's a genuinely interesting debate. You should all look it up. It's such an interesting debate. Marshall Sahlin's the guy.
Post-colonial also implies, I think, that you live in a time that's not colonial anymore.
I don't.
In the term itself, that there's a post-colonial.
Yes and no. Yes and no in the sense that it's sort of similar to postmodernism and post-structuralism and all the posts, where it's sort of like we think we're beyond, but we're kind of not. So post-coloniality is sort of interested in that tension between like, why do we feel like we've moved past it, but in many ways we really haven't. It's that sort of like, what's the word? Is that dissonance, I think, that post-colonial theory is, or post-colonial thought is most interested in. But even defining post-colonial thought is very like, for example, I included Spivak there, and Spivak is like, I'm not a post-colonial scholar. I don't associate myself with. So it's yeah. So do I know about Nia? No, I don't know about Nia. Does anyone know about Nia Pero?
I think Indian is not organized. Lab movement, I think. To
Okay.
again save the environment.
The environment. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
But it's based on Seattle, where the Indian.
Oh, it's in Seattle.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't read it.
I will read it.
No. We're being recorded. No.
Christina says, thank you. So
Stop,
that's
stop.
good here.
Aretha.
Oh, there's another one?
Mhm.
No? Okay. I will, yes, I will read this. Nihil de nobis sine nobis, nothing about us without us. So I'm a social work student and I would like to ask, speaking of modernity, how can we ethically introduce decolonized enlightenment and the modernity itself other than doing the good approach without reinforcing this epistemic dominance to them? And this module alone speaks for itself of how Eurocentric the knowledge that we all know. Yeah, absolutely. By good, do you mean like sort of almost like the civilizing mission? Is that what you mean by good? Sort of how this becomes like a moral savior complex that's introduced?
The
Is that what you
answer
mean?
is participatory work.
Oh, okay. Yes. Oh, wait, Nata has an answer.
Oh, I mean, no, that's just a thought. I mean, when it starts to be the white savior thing when you assume that your knowledge is better than what they have, that your knowledge is better than their lived experiences. And I think doing a lot of participatory work, and by that I mean like genuinely participatory. You're not just bringing stuff to them and then asking them, oh, what do you think about this? You're actually engaging with them and looking into their own knowledge systems, what they currently know, what they've already tried, and why it might not work, and not trying to impose your own thing without engaging with them.
Yeah. That's did you hear that, Rita? Oh, okay. Does anyone else want to chime in? Nathan, you've done some organizing work too.
Yeah, I think if you want to decolonize something, it is the society or the people who speak on it, not us, because we are like
Yeah.
outsiders.
Yeah,
We are,
yeah.
we can amplify their voices.
Yeah,
We can
yeah.
support their
Yeah.
mission.
Yeah.
Because they are the one who got, got oppressed or like, got civilized. So they are the one who resist and we should resist.
Yeah. You know what's so interesting? The way we've moved. So we've been talking about decolonization, colonization all of this time, but notice where we ended. We ended at a notion of colonization that has nothing to do with Europe, or at least not nominally. It's more general almost, where it's like colonization is an act of like imposing without
Yeah.
listening almost. And that is, I think the lesson for us as Indonesians is that Europeans aren't the only ones who can do that. They've been doing that for so long, but they're not the only ones who can do this, right? And that's also part of what we want to get at in module 3,
True.
right? It's
Name it.
it's like anyone. I'm not even. It's like it's
Okay.
anyone. It's not even. I don't have to name anyone because anyone can do it,
Okay.
right? But no, just a thought.
There's really interesting statement from Chipri, the director of Pesta Babi,
Yes.
because why they are putting colonization after Pesta Babi. It's because we do the same thing like what the Dutch
Yeah.
do
The
to
Dutch
us.
did to us. Right. He's the
So,
father.
yeah.
Why are we? Is he haunting us? Sorry.
Please do watch Pesta Babi. There's more information.
It's really good.
It's a really good documentary on West Papua.
I think Alcia raised her hand.
Oh, she raised her hand? She did?
Yeah,
No?
you're just calling her out.
Oh,
comment.
maybe I did. I completely forgot because I was what Nata and Nathan said, it's also really I like their answers, but I was thinking about Areta's question about how to introduce decolonized enlightenment. And because she's like in social work, I was thinking like just grounding it back to how do you like teach people, right, about decolonized enlightenment. And I was putting it on the chat that you can also look at the constitution of the enlightenment itself. We like to think about it as if it's like, oh, it's very Eurocentric, it's in a bubble, but like other stuff around the world is also going on at the same time, which in model 3 we would talk about. like the Islamic reformism, the pan-Arabism, pan-Islamism, the constitution that came with with Western modernity and enlightenment, as well as the Marxist. Like it's not just, like we tend to look at it as if kacamata kuda, like only through like very much one tunnel vision. But the world has existed before all of this, even, before the ideology of secularism, modern nation states. It's already been existing. So, and it's not like it just came and everybody just like accepted it. A lot of negotiation, consultation happening all the time. So,
Yes. Oh, Nathan wants to. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I forgot the social work word. But I think it's very important because in Indonesia, for example, how NGOs work, it's because I work in NGOs for a lot of time. They are still imposing something. For example, if they do like the human rights activity, what's that mean? Human rights
Infiltration. No.
human rights campaign, yeah,
Okay.
program in like, for example, in Papua, they're imposing like something from their own
Where they're coming from.
where they're coming from. Also,
Yeah,
even
yeah,
like
yeah.
Indonesia, they have like this program called Pamsimas. So Pamsimas wants to solve the water crisis problem.
Yeah.
But at the end, they are using like this kind of new technology that doesn't work, that doesn't have like this participatory framework with the indigenous community. So the social work is colonization itself.
Right.
You have
Right.
to
hiding.
decolonize
Yeah.
social work.
Right.
You know what? I think the current decolonial turn in social work, like Chipre did with the film Pesta Babi, is they are using the Red Cross movement using salib that already been used by the West Papuans, and it became the center of the movement of the praxis.
Yeah.
So I think in the social work, there's also like this. I don't know. I'm very decolonial. I have like a decolonial mind. So back to the decolonial third, because there's the post-colonial third.
Yeah.
There's like decolonial third.
Yeah. It's a yes.
The social work, yeah. The NGOs, like international NGOs,
Yeah.
United Nations, World Bank most of them are like shit.
But,
Other people work in NGO knows this. I hope they know. It's okay. They know they're.
it'll be recorded. It'll be broadcasted. So it's
Okay,
out.
cut this
It's all
part
out.
out.
Yeah.
But yeah, social work.
Yeah. We'll actually unpack this idea. We'll actually unpack this idea more in 2 weeks when we talk about emancipation, and especially when we start focusing on Spivak, but she kind of goes into how tricky and how naughty this is, right? About how naughty with a K and O, not. Sorry, I had to calm Nathan down. Sorry, I don't know. This is our sessions have never gone like this before. Yeah, Spivak talks about this, especially with sort of a lot of what Nathan was talking about how you have to be careful that you're not just talking above someone, and that you actually have to sort of like let them speak. But also where it gets tricky is that, and she critiques the French post-structuralists, people like Foucault and Deleuze. And her argument is, I'm gonna see, I don't know if I can say it because it's very complicated and my brain cells are sort of contracted already. And essentially she's trying to say that, what she's trying to show is that sometimes people who claim that I'm not speaking for anyone. I'm just letting you speak for yourselves. They're already speaking for them. It sounds kind of paradoxical, but we'll get into that once we talk about Spiva. We'll save that for 2 weeks later or three. That's good.
But then again, I'm in touch with. Yeah, they didn't know. That's really they didn't know.
Okay, does anyone else want to chime in? I think we've already gone. It's almost 9. 9. It's 9, yeah. So maybe let's just call it. Oh wait, someone else. Oh, yes. So when we talk about, so we're going to be talking about Spivak and Wollstonecraft, and we're going to sort of see. So we're gonna talk about Wollstonecraft's sort of ideal of sort of Wollstonecraft's version of feminism, and we're gonna see Spivak's post-colonial sort of take on it, and sort of how that sort of is. And she tries to complicate the story essentially. And I didn't mention it in the well, I haven't. This will come much later on, but eventually when we talk about Marxism, we're gonna look at that's relationship to feminism too. Um, because a lot of, and Marxism is especially interesting because it's an emancipatory sort of movement. But can an emancipatory movement end up doing the exact opposite sometimes? And we're going to see that with relation to sort of gendered dynamics. So I'll talk about that. And if you can get, I don't know if she'll be able to present, but we have a friend where if her schedule aligns, she'll be giving a presentation on the construction of, I think it's on the construction of gender in colonial law and how it's linked to liberalism. Yes, but that's still up there. We still don't know if that's going to happen. So,
There's a really good book for this one. Sylvia Federici, The Caliban and the Witch.
oh, you should type it.
So The Caliban and the Witch talks a lot about like this concept of modernity as well, like from like feudalism to capitalism and a lot of like feminism, also like complicating stuff that Marx did, but focusing on the history of witch hunting in Europe. So I think it's very
Yeah.
important as well. I don't know if you have read it or not, but it's very important because she's in the Marxist
Tradition.
but also feminist tradition,
Yeah.
and very radical
Yeah.
and very
Yeah.
political economics.
Yeah.
Also.
Marx was contesting Enlightenment modernity, and Sylvia Federici is now contesting Marxism too.
Yes.
So it's like this thing can keep we can keep this going all day essentially. But yeah, it's a very good book. I haven't read it myself, but people I know who've read it really, really liked it.
It's really good.
Yeah.
Very short. 100 pages. It's super insightful.
100 pages is short according.
Oh my, Bama is there.
Hello, Damai.
Oh my.
We can invite Damai too.
Yeah. Okay. Do you wanna?
Hello.
Oh,
Sorry, it's too early morning. No, it's not.
that's okay.
Just close my camera.
Oh, let's see. Let me just stop sharing. Okay, then I think let's call it quits. Okay.
Next.
Thank you so much, everyone, for showing up. I think we might try to change our time for next week so people in Indonesia can show up more because this is really just bad timing. But yeah, thanks so much for tuning in. We'll upload the recording online eventually. But yeah, thanks everyone. I'll see you all next week. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Local